Okay, aloha mai kako. This is the second Koʻa Call for the month of September 2023. Aloha. My name is Nigel. I'm a planner with KUA. We're extremely excited to introduce Dr. Emmanuel Nuesiri here from University of Chicago. In our quick 5 minutes before he took us on a tour of the world, geography of the world. So extremely excited to hear his story. Kevin's gonna talk real quick about this connection.
Hello, everybody. Emmanuel, I want to, I'm thankful that you're making the time to talk to us. Emmanuel sits with me on a commission for the IUCN Commission on Environment, Economic, and Social Policy, and which kind of provides guidance to the IUCN and how it works. But I think what is most interesting to me about Emmanuel is that he talks about rights-based governance, and I hope he'll talk about how he got to thinking about that. But also for our work here in Hawaii, I feel that the framework he's talking about and the type of conservation he talks about is very relevant to what we do here, except that it's often the vocabulary or the theory or the way we talk about it, it's different. And because we talk about it differently, we don't connect, or we don't know we're actually talking to each other, but in different languages. And I thought Emmanuel lays that out well. And so I'm looking forward to what he has to say about rights-based natural resource governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So I got my presentation. I'm going to share my screen on that. So if Nigel will give me the rights to share, as a co-host, then I'll share my presentation on screen and I'll take you through that. But a little about myself, as I was sharing with everyone earlier. I'm from Cameroon. Cameroon is in West Africa. We are by the Atlantic Ocean. It's a coastal city, a beautiful one at that. And I grew up there. And in that city, we have the Limbe Botanic Garden. The Limbe Botanic Garden was set up by the Germans when they colonized this place 100 years plus ago. And it's a beautiful place we go to relax. As kids, we go there to play, lots of fruits and all that. But this city, Limbe, is also a petroleum city, a gas city. The only petroleum refinery we have in Cameroon is in this city. And of course, we grew up seeing how well people who work in the gas industry get paid. So of course, I wanted to work in the gas industry. So I went to university to study environmental science and geology. Those are the two things I went to study. Really excited doing that, top student doing that because, I saw myself rolling in the oil money, the gas money. But at some point, I took an interest in this botanic garden and the project. There was a forestry project that they had just started there, a conservation project. Back then, late 90s, they called them integrated conservation and development projects, where you want to do conservation, but you want to carry local communities along. You don't want to do it in a dictatorial way anymore. So I joined this project. I was excited. I switched from thinking I want to work in the oil industry to thinking, okay, I want to do plant collection, plant taxonomy, plant collection. And I was excited. And like I was saying earlier, we had a meeting with the director, with the Minister of Environment and Forestry, and we gave our recommendations. They needed to do a national park there. They needed to do a community forest there. They needed to, do the land use plan for this place. And we're excited. We're going to save the trees and the wildlife and all that. Exciting wildlife, elephants and all the rest. And the minister's response was basically, well, put your recommendation on hold because, we've got to think about the politics of this. There's a long history of land dispossession in this place because the Germans came, they created plantations, dispossessed the people from the land. The British came, continued with the plantation idea, further dispossessed the people. And the people now are like, hey, you want to come create a national park? Where are we going to live? You've taken all the best lands and you still want to take some more? So the minister said, the political issues are the real issues. And for me that day, a penny dropped in my head that day. So you're telling me I could spend half of my life in the field doing wildlife, you know, counting the trees and the birds, you know, all this stuff. And I'll do my report and you won't even open it. You won't even read the first page. You're saying the politics of the issue is what counts. So that day, a penny dropped and I decided that, you know what, I want to work in the policy space. If the policy space is where decisions get made, I want to work in the policy space. Science informs policy, yes, but I want to work there. So I went on to do a master's in Cambridge. I did environment and development, but I was now moving slowly from all science to social aspects to science. Then for my PhD, I totally went with environmental governance. For my PhD, did that in Oxford, totally went with environmental governance. So I've been doing governance issues now for about 20 years. And I've seen governance issues move from being at the margins of conservation to now, today that we are here, governance issues are now at the heart of conservation. Because the global biodiversity framework that we've just entered into, the period where we want to implement that, and the GEF meeting that just took place in Canada, the Global Environmental Facility, at the heart of discussions there were governance issues, rights issues, equity issues, community issues, indigenous people issues, was at the heart of the discussion. It has been a tough battle getting there. It's really been a battle. When I got involved with conservation 20 plus years ago, the big name conservationists back then that we worshipped and adored, when you want to talk anything community or governance, they're like, just hold it there, hold it there, hold it there. We're still talking about the gorillas and we're still talking about the elephants. You know, maybe if we got 5 minutes at the end of it all, maybe we can talk some of what you want to talk about. But right now, governance issues, rights issues, equity issues, community issues, indigenous people issues are at the center of it all. And as I take us through my presentation, we would see why that has happened and how, by having this understanding, it can advance the work we do. It can advance the work you do in Hawaii, and it can inform, you know, your own narratives and discussions around the work you do and how to sell it out there. It was the Duke of Edinburgh, King Charles, his father, because his father used to be a patron for worldwide fund for nature. It was the father that said conservation without money is just conversation. You know, it was his father that said that. But no one is going to give you any kind of support if you're not articulating the issues. You know, not just diligently and faithfully, but if you're not also, sometimes they want you to use their own terminologies, you know, for better communication. So hopefully this presentation will help us get to that place. So let's go. So got the slides right there. And okay, slideshow. Right. Everyone can see my screen, all right?
Yes, looks good.
Fantastic. At any point, you can raise a hand, you can speak up and ask a question for clarification. Right. So I decided that we're going to talk about transformative rights-based natural resource governance. What is it and how do we get there? Transformative rights-based natural resource governance. What is it and how do we get there? as Koʻa, how do you get there? And my first starting point is why this focus on governance? First, you would know this by now. Governance is critical determinant of conservation legitimacy, equity, and long-term sustainability. You don't get your natural resource governance right, then the people who live on these landscapes, who've lived there forever, will question what you're doing. Maybe you have the force of government on your side, or maybe you're big business and you can bulldoze your way through, force your way through. The moment you're gone, everything you've tried to do is just going to fall apart. So conservation is now, it's now clear that conservation is a critical determinant of conservation legitimacy. Do you have a right to be there? Do the people want you to be there? Equity, are you fair? Issues around justice and long-term sustainability. The stuff you're doing, are people going to own it and run with it? There's also the growing awareness. There's also a growing awareness and momentum today on governance, including recognition of indigenous peoples and local communities' governance systems. No more top-down. We know, you don't. We're going to tell you how we're doing. There's now an understanding that people in their landscapes should be allies, and the knowledge they possess is valuable for protecting, conserving these landscapes. Third point, there's an urgent need for deeper understanding and improvement in natural resource governance for policy and practice. This third point is critical because often people say management, and when they say management, they think they're talking governance. But management is just one aspect to governance, to natural resource governance. Natural resource governance is bigger than management. Management is an aspect, but it's not all of it. There are other components to governance systems. And lastly, the context where we exist today, you and I today, there's an urgent need to strengthen natural resource governance capacity for indigenous peoples and local communities to ensure a fair implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the Paris Agreement, and the Sustainable Development Goals. These three big global conventions influence the work you do in Hawaii. They influence the work you do because governments sign up to these conventions, government begins to make national policies to meet targets set by these conventions. And when you now go out there to work with communities and government begins to ask you, say you're writing a grant proposal, government begins to ask you, the work you want to do, does it conform to the SDGs? Or the work you want to do, does it make us move further into fulfilling our agreements to the Paris Agreement? Or the work you want to do, there's now the Global Biodiversity Framework, there's the 30 by 30 target. The work you want to do, does it conform to that? So there's additional pressures on indigenous peoples and local community groups who care about nature and the way they use their resources, in the way they protect these resources, in the way they govern these resources from these global conventions, these global agreements. So governance is now central to conservation across all scales, local scale, national scale, global scale. Governance is central. So what is natural resource governance? And why the need for a natural resource governance framework? Well, in 2012, the World Conservation Congress in South Korea, I believe, in 2012, IUCN discussed natural resource governance and came to the conclusion that they still have a long road to travel to do governance better. That's how the Natural Resource Governance Framework was created in 2013 to help IUCN and IUCN members understand governance better and how should we do it From there, one of the first things that came from there was that in conservation sector, in environmental sector, we should be talking about natural resource governance rather than just governance, because that's what we really mean. Businesses talk about corporate governance. Governments talk about public governance. We doing conservation and protection, we should be talking about natural resource governance. And then what is this? A definition, that IUCN, that we favor in IUCN is that by Graham. And Graham's team says natural resource governance can be defined as norms, the way we do things, institutions and structures we set up, and processes that determine how, first, power and responsibilities over natural resources are exercised. That's why it's natural resource governance. How decisions are taken, who takes these decisions, and how citizens, women, men, youth, indigenous people, local communities, participate in and benefit from the management of natural resources. So it's not just participate to serve, let's say, a protection agenda that is coming from maybe Wildlife Conservation Society. They have a protection agenda for a certain plant species in your region or animal species in your region, and that's the only time they need you. No. Before they came there to protect that plant or animal, you were there. You've been there for generations, and the landscape has been there. So there's something you're doing that's right, that should be recognized and celebrated, that participation, and it should be all stakeholders, not one preferred person. Alongside Graham, there is a definition by Brookhoven and team, and they talk about what they see as the defining feature or aspect of natural resource governance. As in, for them, what is the most critical point, critical aspect, critical thing for natural resource governance, without which natural resource governance falls apart in terms of us trying to achieve a positive result. The essence of the concept of governance is in many ways in which public and private actors and civil society, of course, work together in order to create capacity to make and implement decisions. So even at the decision-making stage, it's working together at multiple spatial, temporal, and administrative scales. And for Brookhoven and team, they say it is this mutual interaction, this working together, at multiple scales, local, national, global. It is this working together that is the defining aspect, defining feature of governance institutions and arrangements when we're talking about natural resource governance. Because think about corporate governance for a moment. Coca-Cola or Pepsi, private businesses in governing how they run their businesses, they don't really need you. It's their business. It's for profit. But when it comes to natural resource that we all have a stake in, decisions cannot be made by one party alone. In today's world, it's us together making decisions and then implementing those decisions, having the capacity to make and implement. So this is Brookhoven and team, adding to how we understand natural resource governance. So to then jump in to sort of like opening this box we call governance, the first place we start is the understanding that governance is a system, not just a process. Because often you go to different places and you hear people say, oh, the process of governance, we have to follow it, a process of governance. You hear that a lot. But actually, governance is a system. It's not just a process. The process is an aspect, just one aspect, but governance is a system. What is a system? An example. This is the car exhaust system and its component parts. the car exhaust system and its components parts. So the exhaust on your car, it's all of this. It's a system. There are different components that put together achieve the job of removing waste from your car. Waste that has been treated, even at the level of your car. You know, you got the resonance chamber in the middle there, the muffler and all that. They remove some of the most dangerous toxins from the exhaust. So it's a car exhaust system and its component parts. You can see right at the top there, there's catalytic converter. And then at the end here, there's the tailpipe. For many people, when they talk about the car exhaust, they mean the tailpipe. At the very end, the tailpipe. But this is it all underneath your car. So governance is a system with many component parts that come together. And we have to understand these component parts and how to work with each component to get the result, the ideal results we want. This is another system. Can anyone just respond to what kind of system is this? Anyone?
Respiratory.
Thank you. Yes, this is the respiratory system. Yeah. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Kevin. Yeah. That's the respiratory system. Component parts. Nasal passage, oral cavity, the larynx, the pharynx, the trachea, the bronchi, the lungs, the ribs, the diaphragm. Component parts. You need all these component parts for the system to function and do its job and do it well. So governance is a system. So these are the components of the natural resource governance system. The big pieces that are involved with natural resource governance. You got actors, citizens and stakeholders, decision makers and the people, right holders and duty bearers, indigents and immigrants, employers, employees, rich, poor, heterosexual, LGBTQI, old, young, men and women. You got actors. And what's the guiding influence on how this particular component works? Okay, or does not work okay, are the values that these actors bring, the values that these actors hold. Community group might have a certain value system, indigenous value system on how they look at a landscape. They look at a landscape as living and breathing and a part of what makes them who they are. A business person comes to that same landscape and the business person is seeing dollars. The business person is seeing that, oh, there's that hill up there. That hill has got some diamonds. That hill has got some gold. What am I going to do to mine that and get the product to the market and raise my balance sheet? The business person is seeing dollars. And when you stand beside that business person and you're saying to that business person, oh, that's a wonderful hill. My ancestors, they called that hill the hill of life. My ancestors felt that the hill has so much connection to us as a people. It provided shade during this time in our history. The caves did that. The river comes from there. We have so much history with this hill. If it's not there, we don't think we continue to be a people. And the business person is looking at you and like, right. I'm going to take that hill. I'm going to get some diamonds off that hill. You know, values. Actors, different actors bring in different values. Then, as we begin to work in that landscape, we create institutions. You know, we create institutions. Institutions help us work together in a guided way. Norms, collectives, cooperatives, family, business, government. Institutions help us, humans, work together in a guided way. If we all share the guiding influence behind that institution, the principles behind that institution, if we all share that principles and believe in it, we will complement one another like clockwork. Nobody will need to tell you what you need to do. That's the great thing about institutions. And then, of course, another component are instruments and mechanisms. Global Biodiversity Framework is an instrument and mechanisms, because these are used interchangeably at times. The Global Biodiversity, the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals. That's why all of this, the Global Biodiversity Framework, Paris Agreement, Sustainable Development Goals, they have criteria and indicators because they have targets that we've got to meet. And then through that, when we start working to meet those targets, we create procedures that guide our everyday operations. That's where management comes in. Management comes in at that level of procedures to guide our everyday operations. That's where management comes in. So management is just one part of the governance system. And then we create standard operating procedures, rules for the organization. This is the way we do things, terms of references in that system. Following the system, you got the actors, state, civil society, economy, they intersect. Where state and civil society intersect, you got higher education institutions. Where state and economy intersect, you got state-owned businesses. Where civil society and the economy intersect, you got resource user groups, cooperatives, and unions. At the middle is what we call the local action group or the governance platform. So everywhere you work, there should be a governance platform where all these different stakeholders come together to brainstorm, to make decisions, to share responsibilities and resources. That's the local action group, the platform, where we all come together in every landscape where we work. We need that. Also, the illustration here might not be too clear, but I hope you can make sense of it, especially the very first bit where you see those floodlights at the right-hand side of the illustration, those colored floodlights going on to this landscape. So this just shows you the multiple actor values in natural resource governance. The very first one there, the gray floodlight says, people hold values that's got more to do with living from wetland resources. That's as far as they go. The red pinkish floodlight is about people living in wetland landscapes. They're not just living from the landscape, they see the landscape, they live in the landscape. But there are others who even go further and they're living with wetland species and habitats. They don't just see the landscape for its beauty, for the food it provides. They also see the other members of the landscape and believe that the other members of the landscape have a right to exist too. Living with wetland species and habitats. And the fourth floodlight talks about people who live as wetland. We are one with nature. You hurt the wetland, you hurt us too. So when we use the wetland, we are very conscious of that, and we use the wetland with great care and love. It's like taking care of my own body. Now, this is from a recent publication by Pascal Onay et al. I was part of the team that did this publication for work that we did for the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. You know, so you will have these slides. I would encourage you to look at this article. It's just a 4-5 page article. Well, it's a short one. It's a short article. I'd encourage you to look at it. It's a wonderful one about multiple values we bring to natural resource governance. There is also then understanding governance structure in governance landscapes. You see, governance structure in governance landscapes, sorry. Governance structure in governance landscapes. So you can see at the base of the governance structure, you see stuff like forest user groups, indigenous peoples institutions, traditional institutions, women, youth groups, and others. And a level above that, you then see the forest user groups, they come together to form the community natural resource institutions. Indigenous people, traditional institutions, they come together to form community natural resource institutions. Women, youth, and all that, also community natural resource institutions. And they come together to that landscape platform, whatever landscape you're working on. But there are other actors that are also on that platform. You've got government to secure legitimacy, engage in policy processes. You got markets, business. There. So you got national institutions, you got the landscape itself, you got the resource areas within the landscape, and you got communities. Because the landscape, whether it's a forestry landscape, or it's a marine landscape, or it's primarily a agroforestry landscape, the landscape itself also fits into what we do in the landscape. The landscape influences our actions too. So the governance structure is also influenced by the type of landscape, not just the actors alone. You know? So this is the structure. So there's a governance system, then there's the structure, the different components, and how the different components lock into one another. So your respiratory system, you got, you know, the nose and the mouth, and they lock into your throat, that lock into your lungs. Structure. There is a structure. Every landscape has got a structure, even the landscapes where you work. And we have to ensure that we have a governance platform that brings in all the actors in the landscape and that understands the structure of our landscape, every landscape where we work. We also have, following that, principles. And before I read what's in that bigger box, note the black text. It says, note the following keywords: values, principles, criteria. We've mentioned these words before, but here you will see how they tie into one another. Why values are foundational ethics that guide human actions. Our values come from the local communities and indigenous groups that we belong to, comes from the religious institutions that influence our lives, comes from, you know, other tidbits that we've picked along the way. You know, when you get to that point where you say, you know what, I'm a young man, and as a young man, I believe I'm entitled to. There are values behind that conviction you hold. So while values are foundational ethics that guide human actions, principles are the resulting meta-objectives or major goals that guide action in different contexts and domains of human undertaking. So I have values. And those values, when I go to the US, my values will determine the way I engage with people I meet in the US. I will be following certain principles. You know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And these principles I've set for myself, they tie onto the values I hold. In that context of being in the US. If I leave the US and I'm in France, how do I work out how I'm going to live my everyday life? I live a forestry landscape, I go to a marine landscape. I live a marine landscape and I go to an agroforestry landscape or an agricultural landscape or a desert landscape. You know, my principles will come out, but those principles will be tied to my values. So principles are the resulting meta-objectives or major goals that guide action in different contexts and domains of human undertakings. In an institutional setting like Koʻa, your organization, principles are often accompanied by criteria, through which institutions monitor and assess the effectiveness of actions towards attaining defined targets and outcomes. So you got values, you got principles, then criteria, then targets, then monitoring and evaluation. like that. You know, the intangibles that also are important in governance. They're not physical, you can't hold them, you can't touch them. They're the cultural intangibles. We swim in these intangibles. They are essential. That said, all of this now guided us when we now came out with what we believe is a structural conception of natural resource governance. We call it a framework that we are happy to share with the world. The NRGF was put together in 2013. We went through the first 3-4 years. It was meetings and workshops with experts and practitioners discussing what is governance, how does governance work, and then we learned that, oh, there are values, there are principles, and there are outcomes that people expect. Corporate governance expect to see profits. So we're like, okay, for natural resource governance, what should be the principal values that should guide us? And we're like, rights, human rights and rights of nature. So on the left-hand side of this framework, you see social equity and human rights, and bottom there you see sustaining nature. Rights of people and rights of nature is our foundation. And the rights of people and rights of nature, they are interwoven into the 10 principles we have come up with that we think are essential for best practice in natural resource governance. We're not saying there are only 10 principles. There are many principles out there. When we're doing all this conceptual brainstorming and all that, we had over 30 principles. The first 3-4 years of this, we got funding from SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency. So it was huge, it was big. The participation that has gone into creating this. The second phase of this, between 2017 to 2020, we're able to now put it down. It's okay, this is where we're going. 2 value system, rights of nature, right of people, 10 principles, cross-cutting principles, and then each principle has got criteria. That's why you see those little dots on each of those bigger ones in the middle. And 4 integrated outcomes we want to see: environmental and social resilience, social equity, realization of rights, and healthy ecosystems. 4 integrated outcomes we want to see when we talk about natural resource governance, whether to governments or businesses or community groups. We ask them, the governance practice in your context, what is the goal? Where are you going with it? Have you really thought about it? Hopefully, the framework we have created, we believe, will help governments, IUCN, businesses, local community groups to begin to think about governance in a structural way, in a more intelligent way, in a way that opens up avenues for conversations among various stakeholders, where we can begin to understand one another and where we're going. So that if somebody comes from the business sector and the person comes to the landscape platform meeting where you're discussing governance issues, the person sees this and the person should get it. This is not about corporate governance, because there ain't no profit in here anywhere. It's not about corporate governance, it's about natural resource governance. What are these 10 principles that we've ironed out? These are the 10 principles. There are some definitions under each principles, and then in our framework document, these principles, we put there the criteria, we explain how you can develop your own individual targets. We have assessment manuals that we have designed to help, but these are the 10 principles: inclusive decision-making, number 1; recognition and respect for tenure rights, number 2; recognition and respect for diverse cultures, knowledge, and institutions, number 3; devolution, number 4; strategic vision, direction, and learning, number 5. We keep learning. Coordination and coherence, number 6. In any landscape, sustainable and equitably shared resources in any landscape. Accountability, fair and effective rule of law, access to justice and conflict resolution. So you working in Hawaii, you can look at this and you can do a self-examination with your team, or you can call us and we will help you with that assessment to say, in our landscape, where are we with inclusive decision-making? In our landscape, where are we with accountability? In our landscape, where are we with fair and effective rule of law? In our landscape, where are we with access to justice and conflict resolution? So we can ask ourselves all of this. We can do an assessment. We can help you with that. We can come on the ground and help you do this, or we can work with you in other workshop situations, virtual workshops. But you can assess yourself, see where you are on any of these, and how to get better between you and your partners and your stakeholders, including government. You know, you can do your assessments like this. The NRGF principles, they are rights-based, but they're also justice-affirming. So the principles answer to recognition justice. Recognition justice says, are you being respected? Are you being recognized as not just any stakeholder, but you're local, you're indigenous. And for that landscape, you are the most unique actor because you're local and you're indigenous. You're the most unique actor for that landscape. You know the history of that landscape better than anyone. Researchers can come there, do a PhD, write their papers, publish their papers, but hey, get me? The indigenous people in the landscape, they're the most unique people for that landscape. They know it better than anyone because they've lived it. Everybody else that comes to that landscape learns from them. In time past, the researcher will not acknowledge that learning, but today we know better, and we must acknowledge that learning. So we answer to recognition justice, recognition and respect for tenure rights, recognition of and respect for diverse cultures. We also answer to procedural justice. This is what they call about governance processes. This is where governance processes come into play. Procedural justice, inclusive decision-making. What kind of procedure did we use to get this done? Devolution. Does government know that government cannot do certain things at the local space? Government just has to take his hands off and let local people do it and give them the full backing and resources to get it done. Procedural justice, strategic vision, direction, and learning, the way things should be done. Coordination and coherence, accountability, fair and effective rule of law. And we answer then to distributive justice. We don't just respect you, we have to ensure that where we're looking at sharing of resources, you must be there. Distributive justice. You know, we respect you, we recognize you, you must be there in decision-making, procedural justice, but you also must be there. For profit, you must be there. You've got a right to access to justice. We cannot put obstacles in the ways of community actors or indigenous people actors. We can do that. In time past, governments have done this. Business people do this. Obstacles include killing environmental defenders. These are obstacles that limit access to justice. People want to speak for their rights, and you silence them. This is now the total silence. When environmental defenders get killed, the total silence of that person and that community. So we answer to recognition justice, procedural justice, and distributive justice. So as a group, Koʻa, you are in a landscape, you've identified the other stakeholders that are there, and you now know that, hey, governance is a system, there's a structure, there are principles, and you're like, we want to use this and make governance work better for us in our landscapes with our actors. what do? Steps towards a transformative, fair, and equitable natural resource governance practice. First thing is building that shared understanding of the goals of natural resource governance. Don't assume that when you say natural resource governance, every actor in that landscape are clear about this. There has to be that effort to build that shared understanding of the goals of natural resource governance. Then you go on to an effort to build a shared understanding of the values all actors bring to the project or the landscape governance platforms. What are the values that different actors bring in there? Sometimes some of the difficulties we have, some of the conflict we have that lasts for years and years and years, sometimes it's at the level of values. Our value systems are not the same, and rather than then see how we can work to make this value system complement one another for the good of the landscape and the people, our value systems continue to clash and clash and clash. The corporate business person has got to understand that you come with a value that is economic, that is profit-driven. Your value system is not more superior. Your value system is not higher or better than the persons whose value system says the landscape is part of who we are. It's a value system. You got to respect it. It's of equal weight like your economic value system. And you've got to work together. You got to complement one another. Leave no value system behind. After that, for natural resource governance, stakeholders have to come to that place where they adopt a rights-based governance approach, like that of the NRGF. There are other rights-based governance frameworks out there that other groups have created that you can look at. But because the rights-based ensures human well-being and ensures nature's well-being, the right-based approach ensures human well-being and nature's well-being. It's not one or the other. It's not either. It's both. And the rights-based framework ensures that we keep an eye on both human well-being, nature's well-being. And then, see the arrow, you reach a consensus on the SMART governance outcomes for the project or landscape. SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. So there's got to be this thing where, like I said earlier, you've done your governance assessment on these different principles. Where are we on this? And together, you then say, you know what? We want to do better on accountability. We want to do better on inclusion. We want to do better on having a joint strategic vision. We want to do better on access to justice. Reaching that consensus on where you have to do better. How fast do you want to go? After that, develop a participatory governance action plan for the project or landscape. Often conservation projects will say, we have a species action plan, we have a gorilla action plan, we have a shark action plan, we have an elephant action plan. Hey, where is your governance action plan that shows this is where we are right now? There are 300 individual gorillas. In 5 years, we want there to be 600 gorillas. Where's your governance action plan that says on strategic vision, out of a self-assessment score of 10, we are on 3. But in 3 years' time, we want to be on 7. Where is your governance action plan? Where you set your targets, your governance targets, and you can begin to put a monitoring and evaluation system in place so that you know how well you're doing and going from time to time. And of course, lastly, you have to adopt an adaptive, iterative approach to advancing governance in the project or landscape so that what you are learning gets fed back into the governance platform. Because this building of shared understanding is not something you do today and that's it forever. It's something you have to revisit every 6 months, every year, every 2 years. You got to revisit it. Where are we with our understanding of our goals for natural resource governance in this place? Where are we? What have we learned? as we did our governance action plan, we said we wanted for accountability. We said we wanted to go from 3 to 7 in 3 years. 3 years have come and gone. We're just on 4. What happened? Why are we not on 7? Or we are on 8? We exceeded our targets. So this is something, to think about. In the earlier part of this presentation, I've sort of like taken you through governance nomenclature, how we talk about governance. And I'm ending at this illustration of steps you can take towards a transformative, fair, and equitable natural resource governance practice. Obviously, you can see that the story does not end here. There can be more to talk about, but time constraint for today, I will stop here and take your questions and any other contributions. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. Round of applause. Thank you, Emmanuel. So much notes. I think this is especially good because there's a lot of our staff on, and we're thinking in many different skills of helping ourselves grow, our communities grow, our networks grow, and all these governance and management levels. And I guess that's my question to start off the question time is, what is the difference? We hear resource management and you're saying governance a lot. So what is the difference, I guess, between management and governance?
All right, so I'll take you back here. Yep, right here. Management is down there, procedures. Management, you are implementing procedures that have been set. You are implementing targets that have been agreed at management level. But governance includes those spaces where these targets were discussed, before they were agreed. Governance includes the values people brought into that conversation. So at management level, right, the food has been cooked. At management level, the food has been cooked, and the manager is just there to dish it out. But the food has been cooked. At management level, you're just dishing it out. But the food has been cooked. And, often you can get people to dish it out that don't even have a clue as to the ingredients in that food. They got no clue, but they can dish it out. But even in dishing it out, they have to follow a standard operating procedure that you have set. You've said to them, dish it out at 6 p.m. You've said to them, everybody gets just 1 slice of cheese. You've said to them, don't let anyone serve themselves any piece of chicken because they could run with all of it. You serve the chicken, and if somebody comes back for a seconds, tell them everybody needs to eat first before we give out seconds. Standard operating procedures. The food has been cooked. By the time you're the manager, the food has been cooked. And you're just there to dish it. So governance goes beyond dishing the food. Governance starts from, hey, what are we cooking today? And I'm like, I want some lasagna. And you're like, I want some Hawaiian curry, if there's anything like Hawaiian curry. And the other person is like, hell no, man, I'm going to go with a burger. And you're like, we're talking Hawaiian curry and you're talking about a burger? Is there something wrong with you? And the person is like, oh, Hawaiian curry takes too long. I want the burger, but still I want a hot dog. Governance starts right from there. What are we going to cook today and why? And eventually, if we cannot come to a consensus by discussing, you might take a vote. And say, okay, everybody that wants a curry, raise your hand up. Everybody that wants a hot dog. And finally, you're like, it's going to be the hot dog, or it's going to be the curry. And then you go to the next thing. Who's going to go to the market? Who's going to get the gas for the stove? Who's going to get the water? Who's going to set the table?
That's why generally when we do testimony and stuff, I say governance and management to show that what management is an aspect of governance, but we're talking about something bigger than just management. Although a lot of the community work is kind of, you might consider it management, but it is governance in the decisions they're making around everything they do, and the idea is that they should have a greater level of ability to make decisions over how natural resources are governed from the larger government level. And then there's something you said about I think it was values, something you were talking about earlier. And it just so happened that yesterday I sent a memo to a group talking about natural resource decision making and values. And I think it was in 1998, our natural resource division here in Hawaii, called the Board of Land and Natural Resources, they made a hierarchy of decision makings for decision making when natural resources are being used, and they said they put a priority on first the health of the resources before allowing any commercial use. Ironically, I don't think they've used that since 1998, and so that has something to do with governance culture, that for 30 years they haven't been making decisions based on their own policies. And I think you kind of touched on that. I just thought it was interesting you brought that up.
Yeah. So they put this value system on top, the health of the ecosystem. But you can see that maybe for them it was just an academic exercise, because you've just said somehow they themselves have not kept to that value system that they said is at the top of everything. The health of the system. For us in the NRGF, on top of our value system is rights of people, rights of nature. But everywhere you go, you will see people saying, hey, this is the value system at the top of our scheme here. This is the value system that we hold at the top of our scheme. Whether they just did it as an academic exercise or something that is organic, living, alive, for them is another thing.
I think that's actually, there's a lot about our work that is that we're not trying to actually reinvent wheels. We're trying to remind people of the values that they're making decisions on. I mean, the guy who led the effort to create this policy is now a Supreme Court justice.
Oh, wow.
And we have communities talking about the fact that our Supreme Court has said that our state has to follow a certain value kind of ladder in the decisions they make, but of course they haven't. So like, there's a lot of our work that's not about creating new laws. It's like reminding ourselves what the values are, the culture stuff. So it's very cool.
Yeah. And to begin to show people that values have outcomes. The values you hold have outcomes at the end of the day. And you can trace certain outcomes like destruction of nature and all of that. You can trace it to certain value systems. Value systems that atomize nature, that says, hey, this mountain is in this landscape, but I'm going to derive profit from this mountain. I'm concerned about this mountain, and I'm only going to mine this mountain. And you atomize that mountain, and you forget to know that everything you're going to do on that mountain is going to have effect on the watershed on that landscape. It's going to have effect on the wildlife on that landscape. It's going to have an effect on the people in that landscape. Everything you do on that mountain. But the business person has atomized it. Government gave me a permit for the mountain. But the mountain does not exist alone. The mountain does not exist alone. And often indigenous value systems and local communities' value systems often are very clear on that. No organism in nature, no part of nature exists alone. No way. You impact one, you're impacting the others. You know? So value systems have consequences.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Anybody else have questions?
On any of these, or even from out of this, do you have any governance questions from any work you've been involved with, anything you've observed? I mean,
yeah, I got a question. One, again, like mahalo, because flipping through your slides before, it's really hard to follow, but the way you present it is very clear and relatable, I guess, for us, the frameworks and the visualizations. But you said, which I really love, conservation without money is just conversation.
That's conversation. That's the Duke of Edinburgh. He gave us
that's huge. So like in your experience, is there any, because like if it's like chicken or the egg, like if you have money first, does that impact resource management directions or value or governance?
So the thing with money in any domain, money is an enabler. In any domain, you know, money in itself has no ethics. Money is just an enabler. So whatever ethics you hold, your money will go in that direction. Whatever values you hold, your money will go there. You know, money in itself has no mind. You know, money is just an enabler. So if you want to do conservation with a rights-based approach, you will put your money to that. If you want to do resource use with just, you know, a profit-minded approach, you'll put your money to that, because money is just an enabler that we have created. So we all need money. We all need money for different things we are interested in. Conservation, family life, going on holiday. We all need money because we've created a system in the world today where money is the primary enabler in getting things done. It's not the only enabler. No, money is not the only enabler, but it's a principal enabler to getting things done and making things work. So as conservationists, we can't shy from the realization that we need money like everybody else, because money is a principal enabler. We can't be shy to talk about money. And if we really are doing things that follow certain kinds of value systems, like rights-based values or values that, you know, puts, you know, the health of the ecosystem on top, hey, you got to shout it at the rooftop and go for the money hard. Yeah, go for the money hard. Nothing to be shy about. Go for the money hard. Governments go for the money hard because you don't pay your tax, they're going to lock you up. Governments go for the money hard. You know, businesses go for the money very hard. That's why they bombard you with all kinds of adverts day and night. They're going for the money hard. You know, I mean, just go to your YouTube or your phone. I mean, they're bombarding you everywhere. Get this, buy that, eat this, dress that, blah, blah, blah. They're going for it really hard. No reason why we too, as conservationists, should not go for the money really hard. You know? So when you go for the money, don't think, man, it's an enabler. You don't have it, you just may talk. You know? When you have it, you got a powerful tool to move mountains. You know? Yeah, so.
Thank you, Emmanuel. That's one of the things we advocate for, is creating a broader environmental sector, because that is our economy, and the need to employ, train up, and build our own indigenous and local community capacity to create that sector and to pay people so they can stay home, you know. So it's a nice way to frame it. Thank you for coming today. I really hope that there'll be a future opportunity that more than my team will get to spend time with you or get to meet you outside of Zoom. And we'll just keep that in mind if you can stay in touch. I mean, I know I'll see you again soon, at least every year for the next couple of years.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
stay in touch.
That would be great. One of the things we're trying to do is look for money to take the NRGF out of there. So look for money to come to Hawaii, to come to Koʻa, to work with you and your stakeholders on these kinds of issues. That's one of the things that that's where we are at. And it's something that we are going to target very hard for 2024 and 2025 to be able to actually go out there, meet with groups out there and begin to work with groups on these kinds of issues. You know, that's one of the things that we have at heart. When we begin to put that proposal together, you'll definitely hear from us when we begin to put that together, you know, to take the show on the road, right? That's how they say it, right? Yeah, take the show on the road. So thank you, Kevin, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Yeah.